really, really happy that we have come here, Mark and Rob, for me on that side, to talk us through the past, present, and the future of the HIT Lab. The gentlemen will introduce themselves. No, not themselves. They will introduce each other. So Mark, may I ask you to introduce Tom to all of us?
Sure, okay. Well, he hardly needs an introduction. Most of you who are online, of course, have met Tom in one way or other. But I remember when I first met him, I was just a fresh PhD student at the University of Washington. I left New Zealand in '89 to go to spend a summer at the University of Washington as an intern. And I guess that probably the day I arrived, was it the day or the day after I met Tom for the first time. And he made an incredible welcoming place for me to be there. And then that basically changed the course of my life from then on, because that few months turned into a PhD and then a whole career, which we have today. So Tom, of course, is oftentimes referred to as the grandfather of virtual reality, because he's been working in this space since the late 60s. Many of you have seen his talks and have heard his vision and heard about the transition from when he was doing work for the US Air Force and US military and fighter cockpit displays, and then in the late 80s transitioned that into academic and more peaceful pursuits. Oh, thank you so much. And about how when he was in the Air Force and the work he was doing on virtual reality started becoming public, people started contacting him about, could this be applied to different areas, and that motivated him to leave to the University of Washington. And then he was really a great founder and director there and a mentor for me, and the work he's done there has continued to impact the whole field. You know, the virtual retinal display work spun out into the company Microvision, and then Magic Leap, who are still very active today, and there are at least a couple of dozen companies that have come out of his lab there, and hundreds of students have been impacted by him. And of course, everybody who can trace their roots back to the HIT Lab in New Zealand have also been directly impacted by him as well, because he was so instrumental in setting up the lab. So thank you, Tom, for being here, and thank you for all the impact you've had on all of our lives. It's great to have you here.
Wow. Thank you, Mark.
It is. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I believe that a lot of us know Tom and Mark from citing both their work. That brings me to my question to Tom. Would you mind to introduce Mark, please?
Okay. Well, Mark is sort of a son to me. When I first met him, he was the first Kiwi, that I had in the lab. And as it turns out, Mark and I, there was something that resonated there from the very beginning, that I felt that this is a person who can carry the torch as we go into the future. And because I had a lot of things burning inside of me, and the reason I left the working for the Department of Defense was that I wanted to beat my sword into a plowshare and do good with the technology. I felt it could do so much good in the world. And so Mark became one of those torch bearers. And he spent quite a while with me working on his PhD. And it turns out Mark typically was into everything. And I had difficulty getting him to just sort of focus on one thing. I think in aggregate, what happened was he did about 6 or 7 master's degrees. But in the end, I said, Mark, why don't you just sort of put them all together and create a thread through that? And so he did, and he finished, and we're so proud of him. And he still wanted to hang out at the HIT Lab, though. It's one of those things your kid doesn't ever want to leave home, kind of deal. But what happened was about that time, as you'll hear later, probably as we're talking, I was approached by a delegation from Christchurch who came and visited the lab, and through that we had the organization and some good trips. My wife and I Actually, I was just looking for a good vacation to New Zealand, and but thanks to Larry Podmore especially, I'd like to talk about later, and the Canterbury Development Corporation and the University of Canterbury. It turned out just like Mark's experience when I realized, wow, there's something wonderful that can happen here. And over a course of a period of time, we started the HIT Lab New Zealand. And the date, April the 19th, 2002, was my birthday. And so on my birthday, we actually cut the ribbon and opened in the old Mass building. Now, we needed an executive director of the lab. And I thought of a really good candidate for that. I'm not sure Mark really wanted to come back home again. But I sort of convinced him that, hey, this is a good thing. You're a native son, you come back and you carry the banner of the things you've learned, the spirit in which we do things in the U.S. With the spinning off of companies and the students and the way they came, interdisciplinary, all that. And so Mark accepted that, and the university was delighted to have him and embraced him, and then he came here and served, 13 and a half years or so as the executive director of the HIT Lab New Zealand, and put it on the map.
That's a really impressive story, like especially the Mark was into everything. I still think that's the case even today. It made me really curious about like all the topics that you mentioned, like from the 5 or 6 master thesis. Can you remember what the topics were that you were working on?
Oh, there was a lot. We did some projects in robotics, and there's some projects in medical, augmented reality, collaborative systems, VR and AR collaborative systems. Also some work on medical simulators and virtual characters, gesture recognition, speech input. So there's a range of things. But it was easy in those days because so early in the field that nobody was doing much research on anything. So you could wake up one morning and almost have a master's idea before breakfast, because the field is so wide open. So it made it very easy. Much harder now because there's so much money and research been going on in AR and VR. But when you're at the beginning, then the field's wide open. So it's great.
Yeah. Okay.
And also, I should mention that Mark and one of our visiting professors, Hirokato, really developed the beginnings of augmented reality, video-based augmented reality, and formed the first company, AR2Works, that began that. And that was existed for a long time until recently. And Mark was the orchestrator of that. So he not only did all of these different things, and he actually, so there are a lot of riverlets, a lot of creeks coming together, but there was a river that emerged from that with the augmented reality work.
Okay, and then we have Rob with us. Mark, may I ask you to introduce Rob to us?
Sure, of course. Well, of course, most of you know Rob. I can't remember when I first met Rob. I think it was in the about 2005 or 2008. I'm sure.
Yeah, I think that's about right. Yeah.
Yeah. So Rob's been part of my life for a long time, and because I was so impressed with him, and I invited him to come to a sabbatical in 2013. He was been doing some really amazing work at well, first of all, his PhD at George Washington University, and then he went to the Worcester Polytechnic Institute, WPI, where he was doing some VR and immersive gaming work there. And so I invited him for a sabbatical in 2013, and I think he fell in love with New Zealand and with the lab through that. And then when I knew I was going to be leaving the lab, I encouraged him to apply for the position, because I knew he'd be perfect in that role. And so, and he turned out to be fantastic as a director. He's grown the lab, and he's done a really fantastic job in that role. Rob's really also a great researcher. He's done a lot of work, especially in multi-sensory VR, audio, and VR, and so he's been quite instrumental in that field. And he's also well known in the VR community, in the ITV VR conferences for his singing ability, and so he always leads the karaoke sessions, and he is, I guess, he's the life of the party when they have those conferences. So if you're ever at a conference with Rob, then please ask him to sing, or to go to the pub with him, and he'll take you singing. And I also think I was a little bit instrumental when Rob came to New Zealand and helped him fall in love with was rugby. And we went to the pub so we could watch the rugby games in New Zealand, and I think that's stuck. And now he's a big Crusaders and All Blacks fan. So I'm really glad that Rob was able to take over that role and has done such an amazing job with the lab since then. So thanks.
Yeah. Thank you, Mark. And I can add to that, like the skiing skills of Rob, I think, because that's what brought Stefan and me, I think, to New Zealand. Long story. Thank you so much. So we know a little bit more about the three of you now. Tom, can you tell us a little bit about your journey that led up to the foundations of the HIT Labs?
Okay. Well, I hopefully will summarize this. My wife says my stories are way too long, and I try to do the best I can. I really wanted to be an astronaut, and I grew up during the era with the very first moon work and the Mercury program and the Gemini program, the Apollo program. I wanted to be one of those guys. And at 16, I was doing rocket projects, and I actually got the chance to meet three of the original Mercury astronauts and spent an hour with them, just me. And I was 16, these three astronauts. I said, that's what I want to do. But when it came time to go to the Air Force Academy, I flunked the eye test. My eyes weren't good enough. So I broke my heart, but I ended up going to Duke University, getting a degree in electrical engineering, but in ROTC. I was in ROTC. So when I graduated, I was commissioned in the Air Force. And so with that commission, I was, waiting to just waste 3-4 years of my life, going off doing military things until returning back to something I really wanted to do. But when I first arrived on the first day at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base as a brand new second lieutenant, and went to the personnel office to ask them, what is my assignment? They finally found me on the list and said, oh, you're assigned to the LEAP program, Lieutenant's Education Application Program. What does that mean? You can work anywhere you want to at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. I mean, this is like hog heaven for an engineer. I mean, all of the different labs, you can work anywhere you want to. Pick your job. And so I said, I want to fly. I want to fly in the fighters, and I can't be a pilot, but I can be a flight test engineer. So I was flying in the jets and the fighters and phantoms and things like that, and boring holes through the sky and going through the sound barrier and testing stuff. And but I decided, actually, this is pretty boring because these cockpits are awful in terms of the way they're designed. And so I decided to go back into another lab and work on designing cockpits. And that led to coming up with a different scheme of the way we present information to pilots to get higher bandwidth of the brain, which was to take basically what we're doing head-up displays, just make the whole cockpit a huge head-up display that is movable. And that's where virtual reality came from. And I had a pretty good budget from the military, from the taxpayers in the U.S., and I built virtual cockpits. And we had augmented reality, virtual reality. We had so many different things going on that laid foundation for the incredible development of this amazing technology. And we began to realize early on, wow, this is changing everything. What these pilots can do. Airplane didn't change. It was just the information path getting back and forth. So this goes on for 23 years, and I'm now leading the Super Cockpit program, which is building a cockpit that you wear. And I was one of the main far out projects working on at Wright-Patterson. And but then I got a call from the Pentagon saying, we'd like to feature your lab in a press release of the work that you're doing. We need some positive publicity. That was the reason for it. And so as it turns out, I wrote a press release and held a press conference, and the network television people came in, and I was on the CBS Evening News with the biggies and television news commentary. So after that, I started getting these, as Mark mentioned, I started getting these phone calls from people around the world saying, wow, that's really cool technology. My child has cerebral palsy. Could you do anything with that technology to help my child? Then we're surgeons that were saying, can we do this? Can we put my eyes inside the patient, or can you project my map inside the patient so I can, anyhow, so as it turns out, I said, yeah, you can do that, all of that. As a matter of fact, that'd be easy to do compared to what I'm trying to do. And so I realized that this is transformative technology. It could really change the world. And so I asked my leadership, we need to work up a long-term investment strategy, what to do with this virtual reality stuff. And they said, okay. And so I went off for a year and traveled around with the hospitals, went to toy companies, went to kindergartens, went to schools and aerospace companies, because I was wearing my badge, my Department of Defense badge. I could get into all these kind of places. I realized, and this was in 1987, that there's going to be a revolution in computing technology. I could see it happening. Telecommunications, microprocessors, the whole thing was, but no one was working on the interface. Okay, so what? How do you get that back and forth to the brain? So I decided maybe the best thing to do is to get it out of the military. And so I told my management that I want to take this technology and start a national laboratory somewhere that would concentrate on it for other applications besides the military applications. And I'd like to take some of the stuff with me. And they agreed to that. So I started shopping out, and the University of Washington was one of the universities that answered my call and said, yeah, come out and join us. Of course, the Boeing companies out there and Microsoft and a bunch of other folks. So I started the HIT lab, the Human Interface Technology Lab, that would take the technology that we're working on, including augmented virtual reality. We're also doing a little bit of stuff on artificial intelligence at the time. And we would do other things with it. And my mandate at the university, when they hired me, they brought me in as a full professor with tenure. And oh, by the way, they'd already sent me to do my PhD, the Air Force had, to do my PhD at the University of Southampton in England. And so I was qualified to be an academic. I hadn't had any other training there. And so I show up at the University of Washington. They give me space in this new building and give me a budget of $2 million. And they say, okay, here are the rules. Your whole idea is to spin off companies. Develop technology, build a bridge to industry, and patent and do those kind of things. And you have the run of the university to do this. And we had students from all over, not only from all the departments of engineering, bio and electrical, mechanical, industrial, computer science and engineering, but also art and drama and music, oceans and fisheries, medical school, dental school, nursing school, occupational health and therapy, geography, the architecture. We have PhD in drama in the HIT lab. And we formed a consortium, industrial consortium that grew to 50 companies, and they pledged $50,000 a year to be a member of this consortium because they've not seen anything like this before. And the students loved it. They're coming from all these different fields, and we were creating 4 patents a month. And in the end, I think our portfolio is around 300 patents.
Wow.
And we raised a whole bunch of money, and we're quite a phenomenon. And ended up in the end spinning off 27 companies. 2 of them are traded on NASDAQ at a market cap of about $13 billion. So this was happening with students.
Mm-hmm.
They were doing this, they were creating, they loved it. I couldn't get them to go home. Mark was one of them. And then we had some visitors. We were the sort of the showcase for when the visitors came to the university. It turns out a delegation came to Seattle from Christchurch, New Zealand. It consisted of the mayor and some people from Jade Software and the university here and Canterbury Development Corporation. And the dean called down and said, there's some visitors here. They've heard about your lab and they want to come see it. And I thought, oh, okay. I mean, New Zealand. I like New Zealand. I've been to New Zealand before in the military. Mm-hmm. I was head of the Air Standardization Coordination Committee to figure out how cockpits could be standardized across all the English-speaking allies. So I thought, yeah, New Zealand's cool. and I have a Kiwi student. And so I invited him to the lab, and I showed him around, and one of the guys in that delegation was Larry Podmore. And Larry Podmore, he's the reason HIT Lab exists here, by the way. Larry was, I showed him around in the lab, and all the students sort of like what's going on outside here. He said, wow, this is really cool. Do you know anything about Christchurch? And I said, well, I've sort of been there. And he said, well, do you think we could do something like that in New Zealand? And I thought, oh gosh, I didn't think about this. This is my chance to get a free vacation to New Zealand if I play this right, you know? And so I said, oh, I don't know, Larry, you know, maybe I should come down and take a look. Oh, would you? We'll fly you down. You and your wife come down and spend 2-3 weeks. We'll fly you down business class and you check it out. And my wife had always wanted to go to New Zealand. I told her about it, how fun it was. So that's what my plan was, to come down and have some fun. And so we did. And on the Canterbury Development Corporation ticket, you know. And so we had a great time traveling around the South Island of New Zealand. And then Larry and the others said, why don't we show you around town and show you the university? And I thought, well, this is the price I have to pay, you know, for this paid vacation. And so they started introducing me to some of the companies around and to the folks at the university. And I'm beginning to think, wow, this is really good. These folks are really good and smart. And anyhow, so what happened was I said, Larry, you know, maybe it can happen. And that, and maybe I should come back again, and we sort of examine it. And so he said, and by this time the university people were along and said, yes, we'll get you an Erskine fellowship to come down to spend some time. And so I did. Sorry for the long story. I'm trying to make it as short as I can.
It's really fascinating.
So I finally worked it out, and the university offered me this Erskine fellowship to spend 6 months. And sort of like what Rob did when he came down. So I started meeting people. I met the Prime Minister and the Deputy Prime Minister and all the other ministers, and the mayor, and all around town, and the businesses and the companies. And we decided to have a little meeting at the dean, at the Vice Chancellor's office. Darrell McGrew was the Vice Chancellor. He was on board with all of this. We got to suck this Furness guy into doing this. And so we had the first meeting ever in the history of Canterbury in his office that had people from industry and from the government and the university in the same room at the same time. It was like a happening. And all of them said, we want to do this. The whole of government said they want to do this. And so we basically signed a deal. There was going to be 3, basically the owners of the HIT Lab New Zealand. It would be the Canterbury Development Corporation, the University of Canterbury, and the University of Washington. And they're all partners in this. And then I would be the international director of this, but we would have another executive director that would come in. And then we would follow the same model, although at that time I said, I'm going to do it right this time. And I decided that what we really need, in addition to a research center, is we need an avenue to get the technology out. And so there were 2 entities that were created. The HIT Lab New Zealand Research Center, which is hosted by the university, and the HIT Lab New Zealand Limited. It was a company that was supported by New Zealand Trade and Enterprise. Also, one of the promises when we get a new building, that was another whole story, a whole building. They said, okay, we're going to set up this lab, where is it going to be? And I said, well, I really like the rugby building out in the Island Park. Can we have that? They said, no, you're not going to get anything like that, rugby thing. Well, what else is available? Well, we have this old maths building. It used to be, it was the mathematics building, then it turned into the psychology building. It sort of smells. It actually did smell. It's rat pee, and all of it. And so we took this tour through the building, and I said, yeah, can we do anything with it? I mean, you can knock holes in the wall, anything you want to. I said, that's perfect.
Mhm.
It's radio building, but it's got character, and it smells. And and so, so then what happened was, so we decided to open the lab. Everybody was on board, signatures done. First two employees were Miranda Hogan, who was sort of our administrator communication person, and then Eric Wood, who was the IT guy. But we didn't have an executive director. So we had to go on a search for executive director. And of course, I already knew who the executive, and everybody did, also knew. And so I thought, we need to bring him in as associate professor with tenure, and which is sort of unheard of. I think he was the youngest associate professor ever here. And so I talked them into it, and they did it. And so Mark shows up. When did you show up finally?
It was early 2001. So you know, you had the ribbon cutting when I wasn't there. So
Yeah.
I came in
A little later.
around August.
Yeah, August, right.
So it was a few months later.
Yeah. So he came in and he inherited this old man's smelly building, and just started from scratch. You know, building a laboratory with a mandate, and he also became the I guess the CEO of the company as well. And so other people started joining, and it just was a miracle what unfolded after that. But one of the deals was, and this is how history finally comes around, is that tertiary education people and the in Museum Trade and Enterprise people said, we'll provide a new building for you. And this was only going to be a temporary thing, you know, Matt's building. And the money was set aside to send to Canterbury to build a lab for the Human Interface Technology Lab. But all the leadership had changed by that time. New vice chancellor, new pro vice chancellor, all of that. And they thought, oh gosh, we got this pot of money. We can do anything with it we want to. And we were reminding them, no, this building was supposed to be for the HIT lab. So they said, well, we'll allocate you a room in this building. And then what happened was, of course, other people came in, and finally the earthquake came. All these other things happened that messed up the old Matt's building. So now the HIT lab is in the building it was always supposed to be in. And thanks to the growth that has happened here with not only what Mark has done and what Ron has done, this is a beautiful space. Really.
Yeah.
It's sort of a quirky building, it's sort of a high-tech building. It sort of has a mind of its own.
Mm-hmm.
But still, this is the proper home for the land museum. So now, to me, this is a wish come true. I mean,
so 20 years, but you finally got
I
here.
mean, it just is, I can't say anything, but it's just pure joy of seeing this and what has happened. And there's a family. There's a family. Family here. We're all family. Once you're in the HIT lab, you're always in the HIT lab. You know, you can't ever escape. And I think all you guys out there will understand that. It's the spirit of the place, the spirit of what we're trying to do. And it's not about the technology. It's really about people. And as Rob says. And so that's, my wife, I'm sure, will get chewed out when I get back home about how long it takes.
No, we don't, like, it's pure joy to listen to you, and thank you so much for sharing this story. I mean, it's really, like, I learned to say a double happy birthday to you, and also that your visionary mind brought us from the moon via Seattle and Washington to Christchurch and to this indeed beautiful and a little bit interesting building that we can call home now, and that we are all really, really happy to have. I mean, Stefan will show us around later on in what fantastic, like, assets and spaces we have here and toys to play around with. But especially also, like, your ideas to, like, we put the human first and help people solve and address the challenges and problems that they face in life. So thank you very much for enabling us to do the work that we are doing at the moment. You mentioned Mark already as a first Kiwi. So Mark, I'm also interested in like your story. We heard already that like you are able with your mind to create 10 master topics already before breakfast. I'm interested in two things. So what like brought you, what made you really being interested in VR and AR? Maybe you also wanted to be an astronaut, I don't know. And what's like in your mind, because except for Rory, who's shying in the corner, you're the only Kiwi here in the round. So what's the speciality about like Kiwis and maybe like being especially suited to do this work? So it's two things.
Sure.
What brought you to get to know Tom and being interested in the things that you're doing and creating? And is there some Kiwi side in you that like helps you maybe?
Sure. So what brought me to the lab in Washington, at the time, I was doing a degree in applied mathematics at Waikato University in Hamilton. And in the final years of the final year, and in that year, I was doing a project on solar flares, making mathematical models for solar flares. And so we had to draw lots and lots of graphs showing what happens when you twist up the sun and it starts ejecting out solar flares. And at the same time, there was just starting, I guess, the first kind of VR hype wave. So because of what I was doing with these mathematics and graphs, I started learning how to do graphics on computers. Of course, in those days, very slow and took minutes to draw a 3D model and everything like that. But I saw what was happening about virtual reality, and I got a little interested in that just from the very early days of the internet. They had the news groups, these text-only news groups. You could log on and you could read about what's happening. And in one of these new groups, Sci.Virtual Worlds, Tom posted an opportunity to come to, he was just starting his lab, and he said, oh, we're going to have our first intake of interns. And, you know, you can come and be an intern for 3 months or 4 months over summer. And so I was just finishing my undergraduate, and so I thought, well, this sounds like a good opportunity. So I emailed, and he said, oh, yeah, that sounds okay, but there's no money to pay you, but you can come if you pay yourself. And so I thought, well, in New Zealand at the time, there were no computers in the whole country that were fast enough to run virtual reality. So and really, in the whole world, in terms of universities, there were really only a couple of places. So I thought this was going to be a great opportunity, and I went to the lab, and you know, I thought, well, I had a few $1,000s in the bank, so I said, well, I'll go over and the worst thing will happen is I'll have a nice holiday and I'll get to try this VR gear. And you know, when I got there, they had the VR equipment they had would have been about $1 million worth of equipment, I guess. Huge fridge-sized computers and head-mount displays that cost lots of money and just unbelievable. But of course, for now, that's like 320 by 240 pixel resolution, and your mobile phones are much faster. But that kind of caught me the bug, and then after that, I knew that was what I wanted to kind of go into. The lucky thing is that when you're at the beginning of a field like that, then you can have lots of impact and do lots of things. And so, getting back to the second part of the question about being a Kiwi. So when I first went to the US, it was a bit intimidating because nobody knew the University of Waikato, and University of Washington was really good. But I found that I could fit in quite well there. And one thing I think from New Zealanders, and at least for myself, is that when I was raised, we were always taught that to give everything a go, and you could, you have this kind of number 8 wire mentality where you could fix anything or build anything yourself. And so through my high school and undergraduate, that was the same mentality I had. So when I got to the lab, I just dived in and learned how to code and built things myself. And then when I was in my PhD, maybe a year or two with Tom, I then went over to MIT for an internship. And of course, MIT, it's the #1 university in the world for engineering, and it was very intimidating. But when I got there, I found, I didn't have an MIT background, but I was just as good as these other people at MIT. And it was that same kind of hands-on, build anything yourself attitude that did me really well. So I think that's what helps with New Zealanders. And there's one last thing is coming to start the lab here. I had several opportunities. I could have come to the lab here. I also had a job offer from Kodak at the time. Kodak had a small innovation lab inside the whole Kodak company, and so that was very interesting. And then also, just near to my house in Seattle, Intel had set up this new lab and very well funded, and they wanted me to come and be their lead for the user experience or user interface. It was mostly a hardware lab, but they wanted somebody to come and do user interface stuff. And so I had these opportunities, and of course Intel and Kodak were offering lots of money. But I thought, well, the worst case will happen if I come to New Zealand is that I'll come and I'll be a failure, and but I'll still be young enough so I can do another career after that. So and I could, in New Zealand I could be the leader of my own lab, even though there's really only 4 or 5 people at the time, or I could go to work with Intel and be underneath 2 or 3 levels of management and have my group there, but not really have much influence. So that's what that kind of same hands-on, can-do attitude said. Well, I've worked before. I may as well just give it a go and see what happens. And things worked out really well. It's great. So I think that's a bit about how I came here, and also what I guess New Zealanders kind of have that attitude about giving everything a go and hopefully not being too intimidated on the world stage.
Mm. Yeah. So I would say, like, it's lucky for us that you both were brave enough to follow your dreams and to do what you really wanted to do and what your heart told you. So that's really great.
Well, I'm also very thankful for Tom for creating the opportunity, because if he hadn't had that conversation with the Christchurch people, then more than likely I would have worked at Intel, and maybe 5 years later they closed that lab down, so I may have been somewhere else in Intel, or maybe stayed in the US and never come back to New Zealand. So it's a great opportunity that he provided to me.
Well, there's another part of the story too, and that is what happened to us as a part of working with Mark here, because one of the deals I made with the University of Washington is I have to go down to New Zealand every year, January to April, to make sure that Mark's doing okay. Mm-hmm. And so that they said sure, and the Canterbury said we'll pay for him when he's down here, kind of thing. And so every year we came for 16 years or something like that, and bought a home, and we were wannabe Kiwis, although I think they never told us what the initiation was. I think it's jumping off a bridge somewhere, New Queenstown. But we fell in love with it. It became our home, and so that was a high spot of our every year, is to come down and spend time with Mark and with the lab and the students that started growing, to see the wonder of what was unfolding here. And again, I want to go back to Larry Podmore just a minute. Larry was orchestrating a lot of these things behind the scenes, and the meetings we had with government and things like that. And his role was invaluable in this. So it wouldn't have happened without him. He could see it. He could see where this could lead. And now, Larry, I hope you're watching. You'll see it actually happen with the vision that we shared back then as unfolded. And Rob is the beautiful thing too about Rob is he's just a good guy. And a brilliant guy, and I really love him because he has that same spirit that I think we started off with in carrying that about, and what the transformation is happening here at the university, which is just amazing to me. He's certainly been part of the catalyst for that, and part of the diligence required to fight political battles and things like that. And this is what a university should be. This is what it should be doing, and having all these maker spaces and things like that. So I'm just thrilled to be here, and the good work that Rob has done, and carrying the torch.
Yeah, I can just fully agree with having the pleasure of working with Rob, who is actually in your home that you mentioned at the moment for a reason. And yes, Rob, you are a wonderful director of the lab, and you're so much more than singing and skiing. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey that brought you to the HIT lab?
Yeah. Sure. Well, first, thanks for all the kind words.
Okay,
So there's so many connections that I can see in various places. When I was a PhD student in the 90s, all the good work was coming out of the HIT lab in Seattle. And so I forget the name of the woman who was curating the library or the repository of
Toni Emerson.
paper. Say again?
Toni Emerson.
Yes, Toni Emerson. So there was all of this amazing stuff coming out of the HIT lab in Seattle, and we were all reading all these things coming out of the HIT lab. And so that was my first understanding that that there was something really interesting going on out there in Seattle. And the stuff on distraction therapy was really, really amazing. The stuff that Hunter was doing. There was so much amazing stuff that was, it really seemed like an amazing hotbed. And I first got into VR really based on books and things, the Neuromancer and these types of things. And I've always been a space buff. I actually also wanted to be an astronaut. And I applied to NASA for 10 years. I submitted my application along with the other 3,000, 4,000 people that wanted to become astronauts. Just submitting made me feel giddy. Just, I didn't think I had a chance, but anyway, just submitting. And maybe that's a little bit of a Kiwi attitude, is like, well, why not? I might as well just apply, because you never know what's going to happen. So anyway, that didn't quite work out, which is fine with me. And then, as Mark says, I've known Mark, since probably about 2005. We would go to the same conference, and every year I would tell Mark, I'm really looking forward to coming to New Zealand sometime. And Mark's like, yeah, sure, sometime, that's great. And then the next year I moved to WPI, and then I said, Mark, if I get tenure, I'm going to come for sabbatical. He's like, yeah, no worries. And then the next year I'd see him and I'd say the same thing, and he was always no worries. And then I got tenure, and I said, Mark, I'm coming. And he said, oh, you're coming. So of course, as Mark is wont to do, he organized everything and made it really easy for me to come. He arranged an Erskine fellowship for me to come, and started working on a little Google project that turned into something a little bit more than a little Google project while I was there. And brought the whole family down, and we just loved New Zealand. It was just a fantastic thing. And of course, I came to work with Mark, who's leader in the field, and we did come for New Zealand as well, because New Zealand is just a really special place. But coming here, I'm more of a VR person, and Mark's more of an AR person. So what you're supposed to do on sabbatical is learn something a little bit different. And so I definitely was able to do that. But I really noticed that the vibe at the lab was always so positive and so energetic and messy, right? So that's what you want. You want a lab where people are doing stuff and making stuff, and as I say, like burning their fingernails, soldering some stuff up, and making a mess and cleaning up. But the vibe was just really great. And I connected with a number of people. We did some joint projects and went back to WPI, and that went really well. And, as I've said this before, but I feel like we left New Zealand, but New Zealand never really left us, and the lab never really left us. And so when the opportunity came up to email saying that Mark was leaving the lab and they're looking for someone to replace him, and would I be interested? And I looked at my wife and I said, honey, what do you think? And she said, yes, immediately. So there was, we had the whole family on board in terms of coming back. And then came back for interviews and everything, and arrived. And, I did a lot of soul searching as to how do you, Mark is the heart and soul of the lab. Everybody equates Mark with the HIT Lab New Zealand, Mark and HIT Lab New Zealand, rightfully so, because that's the amount of effort and aroha and everything that he put into making the lab what it is, and helping the people really feel loved, supported, and engaged in solving real problems. That's really hard to come in and trying to pick up that mantle. And again, I had a lot of conversations with my wife about how to do it. I had a lot of conversations with Mark, and in the end, you can't try and replace anybody. You just have to have at some point the confidence to say, I think some of my ideas are probably good ideas, and so let's try to do this. Keep a lot of the same infrastructure in place. Don't try and change everything, but try and kind of make it your own. So there were a couple interesting problems that I was faced with. Not anything major, but just kind of how do you restart? How do you re-energize the lab? And it became pretty clear that one of the things that we really needed was more staff. We really needed more academic staff. And as anybody in academia knows, the hardest things to get in academia are hiring new people and space. So these are the two things that are just really hard to get at a university. And so we actually had a pretty good space, so I wasn't too worried about that, but I was more worried about how do you get more staff. So I decided, Mark had applied for this big grant program called Entrepreneurial Universities, which is trying to do very much what the HIT Lab does, which is be at this intersection between academia and industry. And so that's when I started to explore, and the whole goal is to bring people outside of New Zealand, academics who are entrepreneurial academics outside of New Zealand, and to bring them into New Zealand. And it was a 4-year contract. I chatted with a bunch of people at Victoria University, had one, and Mark was on one. And so I chatted with these people about what this looks like. And they, I decided that, you have to find an academic who's willing to pick up all their stuff, move to New Zealand and stay for 4 years. And the thing I said was, I don't think that's the right thing to do. I think we need to make these continuing contracts. So they need to be permanent positions. So I went to the administration. I said, if you're really serious about attracting the right people, you need to make these permanent positions. And so they did that. And it was one of these entrepreneurial universities where they made all of the academics who were coming continuing positions, so permanent positions. And so with that in hand, I said, well, why go after one academic when I can go after 3 academics? So, because I decided what I wanted to do is applied immersive gaming. So you need the applied part, you need the immersive part, you need the gaming part, you need the entrepreneurial part. Why look for that in one individual when I can find it in a team of individuals? And so that's when I went out and started to explore, and Stefan, I had met at the same conferences as I had with Stefan, and we did do some, and we did do a bunch of geocaching and traveling and things like that. And so that was a good connection there. So I started to sell the lab little by little to him. He probably didn't know it at the time, but I started to sell the lab little by little to him. And so I won't labor on too much, but the upshot is I was able to solve the problem of not having an engaged, vibrant staff in the lab by using the vehicles that the knobs that I had at my control, which was this Entrepreneurial Universities grant. And I didn't write the grant by myself, but I wrote the first draft by myself, but then the 3 of us and then 4 of us actually wrote this whole thing together. And so it was really good because Heide and Stefan and Andy could write their own positions more or less. And so we could come up with this vision together, and we could hopefully get the money in the end, and everything would fall into place. And then the lab would be pointed in a good direction in terms of that particular problem to solve. And so the shift has been more balance between AR and VR, I would say, and a more incorporation now of games as being a really important aspect of the lab. And so that's my really long response. There were many people that helped me through this whole thing. And I won't talk about the 2 years that we've just spent, but I'll leave those behind in terms of COVID for now. Okay. Shut up.
Rob, a very personal and special thank you for having this idea, this particular idea that enabled Stefan and me and Andy to come to New Zealand and make this a new home. However, you already mentioned some challenges in some. Life is not always only positive. Sadly enough, there's one person who cannot be with us today, which is Ken Beckman, who also played a major role in the development of the HIT Lab. Can you tell us a little bit about him and his role for the HIT Lab in that, Rob?
Yeah, and I'm definitely going to cry during this, but a good friend of mine has said, never apologize for crying. So I will try and get through this anyway. So I guess the one person who made my life really easy getting here was Ken. And it's probably easier if I put together a very short montage of images from him that I'm going to show in a little bit. But talk about a positive person. I mean, Ken Beckman was just so positive on so many levels. Very free-spirited. Also had a very interesting path to get to the HIT Lab, to get to New Zealand. His lovely wife Philippa has two lovely kids, and he really put his heart and soul into the lab in a really big way. And he is the fourth director of the lab. I mean, he was the third director of the lab, but he's the fourth person here who's missing from this director's table, because he for more than 2 years led the lab in between as the transition from Mark to me, and did a really great job. And I just have to say, the number of students who have told me that they would never have made it to New Zealand without Ken really, really looking after them. And they probably wouldn't have made it through their degrees without Ken really looking after them in a major way. And sadly, he passed away from cancer a couple of years ago. But I know that everything that's happened in the lab since then was laid down by his really strong and firm foundations. And so I'll play a short video now of Ken and some pictures. So. Yeah, so he was a very special person, and some of you know we've named our large meeting room is now the Ken Beckman meeting room, and there's a nice picture of him there. And he got me into mountain biking. You know, I wouldn't be biking as much as I do now. One recollection I always have is every couple Wednesdays he would call a special meeting of the HIT Lab leadership out at McLean's Island, and we'd go out and have a nice bike ride around McLean's Island, and then have some beers afterwards as well. And that was just one of the things that he said, you know, you just need to do this. You just need to really enjoy not just the work time, but really enjoy the time that you have and really find this work-life balance. And he really taught me that in a big way. So we miss Ken, but he's always here in spirit. And so that's what I'll say about that.
Thank you very, very much for sharing and sharing Ken with us today and his story, and also his contributions to the lab. I do have a couple of more questions prepared, and at least one that I really want to also ask Rob, Tom, and Mark. However, if anyone needs a short break after that, for water, coffee, tea?
We're fine.
Yeah, good. Then we just continue. And if the audience has any questions, we do have a system in place that you can put your questions down, I would assume, in the chat, or and they will be somehow provided to us. Yeah, Rob, I can imagine that having to say goodbye to such a positive colleague and a friend is one of the challenges that you faced. I always believe that we can learn a lot from our mistakes, from our challenges that life just has in its pockets for us, and share stories how we overcome challenges. Can you tell us a little bit about challenges that you faced as a director at the HIT Lab and how you overcame it? I mean, the story about the gaming initiative was certainly one of them, but maybe there are or is another challenge that you are willing to share with us, including how you tackled it.
Sure, it's obviously a very good question, and I would say I will talk a little bit about COVID, because COVID has really presented a very interesting problem and challenge, I guess, to many academic, well, everybody, but academic institutions in New Zealand in particular, because we've always been a beacon of international students coming to the lab, and when that pathway is blocked, it's a big challenge. There's always a challenge within universities to kind of financially justify your existence. So there's a tension, especially these days, between the business of education and what we really try and do, which is to make the world a better place and to support students in their growth and exploration of everything. So that's always a challenge. One of the problems is with our master's program, for example, that we couldn't bring any more international students in to come the MHIT with us. The MHIT has never really been as huge as we had, as large as successful as we had hoped it was. And so part of the thought was, how do we counteract that? And I always think that a really good way to do that is to get the opinions of a bunch of people around you. So I remember that we all sat together as academics to try and figure out what to do, how to revitalize the MHIT program in different ways. And I think one of those was to pivot a little bit more towards retaining our Kiwi, or potential Kiwi students in the engineering disciplines who might not have thought in the past about doing an MHIT. And I know that Stefan and you put in a lot of effort in reaching out to them and presenting them. Stefan in particular gave many presentations over to the other departments to try, and it's not just a financial problem, but you need bodies in the lab. The lab exists and is the most vibrant when you have lots of people here. And the fact that we couldn't get people into the lab was just sad, to be honest. It was just really sad that we couldn't do it. And so Chris Bojarski also had a lot of input in terms of the center manager in refocusing our efforts to be more creative. Chris went to a lot of outreach opportunities around the university that are scheduled to try and get people to come to the HIT lab, come to the HIT lab, come to the HIT lab. And so part of the solving the problem with getting international students in has really been to solve it is to talk with the great staff that we have to come up with ideas, and being okay with not me having to do those things, but having the confidence in the rest of the staff that they'll do a good job. I don't have to micromanage these things. I don't have to be the one person who has their fingers in everything. As long as you surround yourself with really engaged and able and frankly nice people, good things are going to happen. And just leave it to them, and they will be able to come up with the creative ideas. And so I think the way I would suggest or promote that people try and solve problems is not by trying to solve them individually, but rather embracing the people around you to think about and to get these creative ideas that are around. Anyway, that's one thing.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the compliment, Rob, that was included. Mark, what was your biggest challenge related to the HIT lab, and how did you overcome it?
Oh, the HIT lab in New Zealand. A little bit like what Rob was saying. Part of it was getting the sustainability and the structures set up right. And midway through the first year or two when I was here, the university changed dramatically its internal financial model. So that meant that all of the lab had to be self-sustaining, which in the past we had been supported by a central budget. So there was a number of times when that was a concern. In particular, Tom helped out a lot at the beginning by securing a large grant for us from the government. But when that grant finished after 4 years, then we're on our own. So that was a stress point. And at that point, we started talking about setting up the master's program, get income from the students. And also there was nothing really at the university that would teach what we would be teaching. So that was a challenge then. And I think just like Rob said, that the way we worked at the challenges is collectively as a team to try and figure out different solutions. And I've always been impressed with the ability of the colleagues that I had in the lab to come up with solutions to help with that. So that's been my approach, I guess. And I guess Rob's he's navigated very well those similar challenges with again, finance and structure at university, but he's done a great job. I'm sure he'll do a great job over the next 4 or 5 years as well. Yeah.
Thank you. So it comes down to people, I would say.
It does, very much so, yeah, definitely.
Tom, what was your biggest challenge and your solution to it?
Well, it's pretty always money. So you create these monsters and you have to feed them, But I really do appreciate what both Mark and Rob have been saying about the lifeblood of what we're trying to do is in the hearts and the minds of the students. That's why we exist, why we exist in a university. I mean, there are research labs that are not in universities, but they don't have nearly the, how do you put it, the passion and the naivety that you need. You need naivety sometimes. And the imagination and creativity. And so I love this. I love students. I love hanging out with them. Perhaps they keep me sort of young, but how do you keep feeding them? And that is, to me, has been one of the challenges I've had over the years, especially in the early days when nobody really knew what VR was about. And you're trying to say, well, how do you describe that in words? You can't. And so you have to say, you have to try it. All you have to do is put on the headset and you'll know what we're talking about. And of course, in the early days, we didn't really have that. I mean, it's not anything as portable you could carry around and put their heads in things. And they said, yeah, well, you came from the Department of Defense, you had all this money and I said, yeah, that's true. But still, now the march of technology is bringing it down to where it's really practical and affordable. So I think that's one problem that existed all along. We did pretty well at the HIT Lab US, and of course down here at the beginning, as Mark mentioned, getting started. The problem though is the runway that you need to have, because it takes longer than you think to do some of these projects. And after, a couple of years, people get bored. They say, "Oh, wow, what have you done for me in the last 15 minutes?" And we say, "Yeah, this is a journey world. It's not something that, you divide into little discrete projects necessarily and have, and the other thing, a part of that is defending your space. Oh gosh, at the University of Washington, I mean, there's way more work going on than there is space for it. And that's why it's a blessing here. I have this wonderful space, and with the technology that's here. But I had to fight. Matter of fact, one of the fights probably was one of the things that really hurt the lab. One of our favorite visitors at the HIT Lab here was the ambassador, New Zealand ambassador, from the U.S. New Zealand ambassador. And he would come down all the time visiting. And I was usually here and talking about how wonderful, he was saying, "This is fantastic. Was this going on in the U.S.?" I said, "Well, yeah, it really is. I mean, we're the mother, of the HIT Lab New Zealand." And he said, "Well, is there anything I can do to help you?" And I told him, "Yeah, there is actually. I wonder if there's someone you could contact at the University of Washington and tell them how wonderful the HIT Lab is. HIT Lab in New Zealand, the HIT Lab in the U.S., and that they really do need to have their space protected, because there are always people trying to grab the space." So what he did is he wrote a letter to the governor of the state of Washington that Tom Furness, is involved in the HIT Lab in the U.S. and in New Zealand, and what a wonderful work they're doing, and he is concerned about his space. What you can do to look into it. That probably wasn't a good thing to have happen, because then the message goes from the governor. What is this? What is this about Ambassador of New Zealand writing me a letter? I'm the governor of the state of Washington. Why am I hearing this from the? And then he starts inquiring the president of the university. The president of the university, it all dribbles down. "Furness, what are you doing?" And I thought, well, gosh, this is sort of a shot over the bow, Then I got their attention, right? But after that, they said, "Gosh, this guy's a loose cannon. He's causing us going to cause us a lot of trouble." And so I made enemies as a result of that. But I was so passionate about the work we were doing. We had spun off all these companies. The dean was even borrowing money from us, because we had more in our slush fund than he had in his slush fund. And so they couldn't really do much with me, because as long as I was bringing in money, it was all right, I guess. So the politics and the money raising, to me, were the biggest challenges, and always have been. There's so much we can do. I mean, the opportunities are unlimited of the research we need to be doing, and you have to go up against the naysayers and the ones who just don't get it. So I think that's the biggest thing that I've had to deal with.
From your story, it's really clear that how passionate you are about the research and the people, and that you need the space and the money to support and do both. And yeah, you found clearly your ways how to play the systems, I would say, and deal with it and find solutions. That are solutions on a very high level. And I think all of us, we are quite aware of the advantages that we had, in the sense of the countries that we were born in, the education that we went through, and the support that we had. But not everyone has these advantages. Right. So on a of a different level, at least, what would you recommend students that don't have these advantages? What should they do to also follow their dreams and follow their passion?
Will we start, or this is such a good question. Yeah. And in order to, what I've found is that there are no such thing as dumb kids. That in South Africa, I was invited to give a keynote address at SIGGRAPH in South Africa, and in a little town called Grahamstown, which is sort of about 100,000 people, and sort of divided about half and half, one on the good side of the affluent side of the town, and the other is just completely opposite, the apartheid kind of side of town. And and they drove me around the town to see what it was like, you know, and of course on the affluent side of town, all of the homes were nice homes, but they had these fences with barbed wire around them and things like that. And then when they drove me down around to the other side of town, it was cardboard, you know, it was a shanty town kind of thing, and very little electricity, except for these huge cell phone towers there. I said, what in the world are cell phone towers doing in this area? He said, look at the people. And they all walked around with their cell phones. I said, what? Yeah, they have cell phones, and they're talking to each other and things like that. But they have to send their cell phones to school for the kids to charge them, because there's no electricity they have in their homes to do that. And I said, well, how in the world can kids like this get? And they said, well, actually, the top graduate in computer science at the university, Rhodes University, was one of these kids. And they said, let's show them what we did. So they drove me around to a little elementary school on the apartheid side of town, and it was a playground, and for this little school. And the university had built this little kiosk building. It's about 6 feet by 12 feet or something like that. And with all these little windows in it, and through bars across the windows. And what were happening is you'd reach your hands through, and there was a computer through those bars. And a keyboard and a touchpad thing they'd set up. And what they did was they built that building, microwave linked to the university, turned it on and just left it. And didn't tell anybody, didn't tell the students about it or anything. The students see it being built and things like that. They didn't know what it was. And he said, watch this. And we were there when the kids came out of school. They all flocked around that little building. And they were surfing the internet. They had figured out on their own how to operate those. And he said, one amazing thing, we were here one day, they had figured out that this is some kind of multiplex system inside. And that they set it up so each of them around the kiosk would go to a particular site, a music site, at the same time. And it had the music that actually rotated around that whole site. All on their own. These are kids in elementary school that hadn't had any instruction. And that told me, you know, what if those kids had access? What if all the kids in the world had access? And so it's really about that. I don't worry about the kids if they had the opportunity, access to do that. So one of the things that is happening I started a nonprofit called the Virtual World Society. And that's one of the objects of the Virtual World Society is to lift humanity by providing this kind of technology to basically unlock intelligence and link minds and hearts. And so we've done some projects in Nigeria, and we've done some refugee projects in Iraq and things like that for a lot of these kids who don't have access. And one of the projects we're doing now is called HomeSpark. HomeSpark is actually to create centers of learning in the home that address human superpowers of imagination, and creativity, and curiosity, and love, empathy, because you don't get that in schools. As a matter of fact, in anything, institutional education takes those away. Kid that's interested in art or music or whatever, you know, are shoved into these molds because the teachers have to teach that because of standardized tests. And so this does more to kill those kinds of things than help it. But we felt that really where the magic happens is in the home. Not only when the kids, before they go to school, but lifelong. The home is the magic place. And not, you don't send your kids off to school to get an education. They get their education at home. They get it augmented, yes. But they have to have the passion somewhere in their imagination. It comes from the home. So what we're trying to do with this is to start with a pilot project where we're identifying 100 families worldwide and basically providing them technology and connectivity and the opportunity to learn how to use this stuff and to build their own virtual worlds, working together with all the other 99 families worldwide on the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. The idea of bringing this oneness into what we're doing in our world. And then, of course, we want to expand that to 1,000, 10,000, 10 million families. If 10 million families, members of the Virtual World Society, it's sort of like the National Geographic Society for the mind. If they were able to, we could have that many families. Maybe they contribute $100 a year. $100 times 10 million is $1 billion a year. What could you do with $1 billion a year of providing accessibility to families? That's the kind of thinking we need to be doing, and dealing with accessibility, because that's the problem. It's not the intelligence of the kids or anyone. It's really, and once that accessibility happens and they start building worlds, let's face it, in the business we're in, we're tool makers, right? That's what we do, is we build tools in order to link minds and hearts and unlock intelligence. But the people that are going to eventually be the rulers of the world are the content makers, the ones that make the stories, the ones that make the experiences. And we are providing a vehicle for that. But once they're the ones that are going to help us along, the artists, the musicians, the poets, those people who are embracing, the better part of ourselves. Not that engineers don't do that,
Some do, maybe.
That's right. So that's a long answer to your question again, but I believe it's if we could provide that way, and not only accessibility and with well people, the accessibility of those who have some disabilities. And I think there is a growing movement in that whole area to provide that. But then again, you have to have the money to do that too. Yeah.
And luckily, we do have the HIT Lab and smart students who do exactly that.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful story, like how your ideas emerge from the moon to the homes and the hearts of people. Mark, do you want to add anything? I get signals that we come slowly to the end of this session and to the Q&A, but I really want to hear Rob's and Mark's.
Oh, well, just briefly, I think what is key is to put people in the environment they can flourish, and hopefully at the HIT Lab in New Zealand, when I was there, and then when Rob, we've created that environment, and certainly people who come here get to experience that, and hopefully they can take a piece of that away with them and create that in their own place as well. So it's really about giving people access to knowledge and in some case technology. And when I started doing VR, it was $1 million for the system, and there were probably only, like I said, maybe 4 or 5 universities in the whole world that could do that, and that was a big barrier. But now the VR devices, if you've got a mobile phone, you can do augmented reality or VR, and certainly around interface design and interaction design, you don't need any technology. So it's really about knowledge sharing. And of course, with the internet, like Tom said, that's become a freely accessible, available as well. So I think it's just about creating that environment, and you can create some amazing things, which is why I'm really excited about where the HIT Lab New Zealand's going. Is they've grown and still got that same environment, and I think you will see a lot of amazing things coming out of the lab as we have in the past. So,
and it's certainly based on all the three of you sharing this idea of that you are willing to share your knowledge and share your stories and make other people also passionate. Rob, do you want to add anything to my question?
No, I think both Tom and Mark did a great job. I just for me, it's and again, you've been a good impetus for this, which is creating safe spaces where people feel welcome and engaged and empowered. And I think all of us espouse that in the places that we've been trying to build. So,
thank you. I really don't want to stop to talk to you all and have this conversation, and luckily we will spend the rest of the day together. However, there is some more time for questions from the audience. Look into the technical support because I can't see anything.
Well, I can mention, let me tell just a little piece at the end about that. You keep bringing up the moon and the astronaut. Rob brought up the astronaut thing. So I was disappointed I didn't get to go to the moon, but I actually did.
You did?
I did. But here's the story. A few years ago, I was contacted by some of my former students that worked at NASA. Said, Tom, we'd like for you to come down and see what we're doing with your technology. And this is NASA Houston and at the Space Flight Center there. And they had built the simulator that trained the astronauts to do the Hubble Space Telescope repair. You remember they had to capture the Hubble Space Telescope and sort of redo it and make it right. And they'd use my stuff for this. And so I went down to NASA Houston and they showed me around, and I actually flew the space shuttle simulator, and I was landing the space shuttle, from the coming down from the orbit, and then they took me to their simulator they built, and I put the spacesuit on, and everything was virtually projected to me, and so there I was in my spacesuit in the shuttle bay, and on the robot arm moving me out to the Hubble Space Telescope. Oh gosh, I mean, this was like it was real.
Mm-hmm.
And I was looking up at the Earth. We're flying like this, upside down. I was looking up at the Earth, and over there's the moon and the stars. And so I went over to the space, and I did the things I was supposed to do in terms of doing the repair of the electronics rack and some of the optics and things like that. And I was moving those things around and doing that. And then as I was coming back on the robot arm, I was thinking, I did go into space.
You did.
And it was a space that I helped build.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized I made it after all. Just like this building, it happened after all. And all these things just takes time to get there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And patience.
And
Thank
patience.
you so much. Yeah. That's a wonderful story. I still don't see questions. I think you can just hop into these spaces next to the microphone and occupy one of the spaces and then raise your question.
you just need to click on one of the open spaces, anybody in the audience, and then you should be able to jump up there.
Oh, the box at the top there, I see. Yeah, by the microphone.
Yeah.
I can see that. That's great.
Uh-huh.
I had a question for you, Rob, actually, if that's,
Yeah.
we can ask questions for you. So I'm just wondering, what's your impression of the lab here and how things are work in New Zealand to compare what you had in the US? Obviously you made a choice to come here, so I'm just curious about what was pros and cons, or what you'd say about what we have here compared to what you had in the US when you lived.
It's a good question. So I came from a very teaching heavy program. So I was director of the games program, but it was primarily an undergraduate institution. So I had a small research lab, but a fun research lab, but it was mainly undergraduate. So from my point of view, coming here, one of the big jumps was I'm not teaching as much as I used to, but I get this on really research. And so that was a big shift. And looking at the infrastructure that's necessary to create an environment like that, Again, this kind of harkens back to some of the challenges, and a lot of research systems that are built typically look like programmers who have tried to do some artwork to make their systems look good. And they might not be as efficient or as optimized as they need to be. And so I found that students tend to spend a lot of time on these problems that maybe don't allow them to advance as quickly as they could otherwise. And so one of the things that I really pushed for, and that we were successfully able to do through the Applied Immersive Gaming Initiative, is to hire an in-house 3D artist and a really, really strong games programmer. I think that has made everybody's life a lot easier, and it has allowed us to really, as Mark said, the tools are now very democratized, and that things are cheap, and the headsets are cheap, and there's a lot of open source tools that are available, but it still requires a big learning curve to get from this great idea to building something that works and looks great. And I didn't want every student to have to be a really strong technical person in order to succeed at the lab. And so by supporting artists or humanities people, the folks who are really important to have at the research table, by offloading some of the technical and artistic heavy lifting that's needed today because the bar is so high. It makes me really happy that we have Shun and Ryan in the lab to really work with the students to develop these just really gorgeous, very well-running projects. And then I think the other piece that I found very different than where I was in the States is the need for an extremely talented and successful financial person. So in Chris Byarski, I can't stress enough how important it has been to bring in a person who's passionate. He's from academia, so he gets it. He's not somebody from the outside, from the business world, who's coming in and is going to count beans, but he really understands the financial realities of diversifying the income to the lab so that we're not only reliant on research funding, and as we all know, that sometimes is a crapshoot. You don't know if things are going to get funded, and there's lots of competition. And so Chris has really been a great voice in helping us have income from our master students, some income from consultancy, some income obviously from grants and those types of successes. And so for me, now we have this amazing team in place, because now we have rockstar academics, we have rockstar games programmers and artists, we have an excellent leadership from the financial and personnel side, we have a great admin staff, and all of that, again, puts us in just a really solid foundation. And that was very different than where I was before, under a department where a lot of the things were outside of my control, but also I didn't have to worry about them. Whereas taking on the directorship of such an independent lab has meant a lot of things. So our website is never perfect, but that was also like a big deal. Is the university likes to have everything under one umbrella, and we've had to fight to keep hitlabnz.org, because it gives us the freedom to be the outward-facing, dynamic, very kind of different place. And several people have, told me, wow, your site looks very different than the rest of us. And I'm like, yes, it does, but we also do things very differently. So I think the big difference has been in the scope of the number of things that I'm responsible for, but also the number of opportunities I have to try and really put this foundation in place that allows us to be sustainable without a single point of potential failure of, well, the grants are dried up, what are we going to do now? And so I think this has been a really big difference that I found. from my time in the States previously.
Thank you, Rob. I watched the time closely. However, I believe that we are flexible enough to make some time for 2 questions. I see Zoe closest to the microphone and Philip too. So Zoe, please, your question.
Tēnā koutou. Thank you so much for this amazing insight into the history of the lab. As a current PhD student, I'm very, very humbled and inspired. And I think one thing that COVID has taken from us is, I guess, that sort of that whakapapa. So to learn that from you all directly has been lovely. Something I've really admired about your leadership, Rob, in the short time I've been in the lab is how you're looking around and going, who's not at the table? And reflecting on my own experience, I admired the HIT lab for a long time, but I thought, oh, that's an engineering, that's for boys, that's not for me. And when Heide joined, I thought, oh, I can actually, maybe I could do this. Maybe I could find a space here. So I'm just keen to hear your thoughts about how we can have a greater range of faces at the table.
That's really tough.
This has always been a concern of mine. That starting I don't know what happens with the girls. I'm a father of daughters. Okay, so I do know what happens. But girls don't think they do the tech stuff. Generally, I don't know what happens. It's around 12, 13, 14, something switch goes on, and they say, "Oh gosh, that's a guy thing." And I don't really like it, or I'm not good at it, or whatever. And that's not true. There is an organization I readily joined. It was actually one of my former students that led me to it. It's called the Girls STEAM Institute, STEAM. Includes art and the STEM thing. What these girls are doing are amazing. They're learning to be entrepreneurs. They're learning to code. They're girls that code groups and things like that. And we really needed to work on that starting really early on. One of the projects that the HIT Lab US did with the Virtual World Society was at the middle school in Seattle, a new middle school. And there we had girls and boys equally. They're 11, 12 years old, 13 years old. Learn how to build virtual worlds to teach STEM subjects to other 11, 12, 13-year-olds. These girls were fantastic. Actually, a lot better than the guys. And the problem is they don't have a chance to show off and do what they can do. And they got to learn to believe in themselves. The guys don't, the boys don't really, they don't really care. I mean, they're just all over the map. But the girls are really serious about this and wanting to make decisions. And they are the leaders. And the projects that were done there were pretty much done by the girls. And we were really serious about that. So back to the question. Thanks for that question, Zoe. And asking the question of who's not at the table. This also has to do with ethnicity, not only with gender. And that there are underserved communities that should be there, not only for learning what the capabilities that they actually have, innate capabilities they have, but to be role models for others. That's what we need as role models, especially role models in girls. And that, I think Rob is, and the point that he made earlier about being about 50-50 in the lab is fantastic, and providing those kind of role models.
I think one of the keys is people seeing faces at the table like them.
Yes.
So like you said, Zoe, having Heide here was instrumental. And so when I was the lab director, we tried to do outreach, and we tried to invite, a variety diversity of people to come and visit the lab and to see what it's like, to talk to other people. We had artists that we funded for a while to come and work in the lab, and of course Roy was doing a lot of research, outreach to the Maori students. We had a few Maori students that came in and did postgraduate degrees with us. So it's really important to do whatever you can to get people like of a diverse background into the lab, and then they'll invite their friends, and then you create that diverse environment you want.
Yeah.
And certainly trying to make sure it's not seen as an engineering club or a tech programming up, you have to make sure that everybody feels like they're home in there at the lab, and they can find a home here, just like Zoe has.
Yeah. So thank you very much for asking the question. And I know that Rob is really, really passionate about it and really serious about making the lab more diverse, the student and staff side. And it's also like, I'm very passionate about this. And I think it, as Tom also said, it doesn't come down to gender, but really the system and the systems that are created from schools onwards. And we need these role models. And so that we are really happy that we have Rory still in the lab, doing a lot as community support for the Maori community. Rob, would you like to add anything?
No, I think it's all been said. Yeah.
Thank you, Zoe. And Philip, I hope you can just change places. Yeah, here we go.
There we go. Yeah, I had to dig up my shirt from the collection. Great to see you, and I'm sure that we'll get to chat a lot more later. I mean, I don't want to take in too much of the time in the next session about the future, but one of the things that I was thinking about when you were talking about the lab and its setup was one of the original premises was that there was going to be a network of HIT labs, and I wonder if you have any thing you think about the comments about the way that's evolved, and is it still a model that labs like the HIT lab should pursue to create affiliated research networks? Is it still viable? I mean, it was great for me as a student and for several other students in my cohort to be able to go and visit, like a sister laboratory. What do you think's become of that concept? Mostly for you, I guess, Tom, as the father of the concept.
Well, thanks, Phil. And Phil, of course, has spent time here at the HIT Lab New Zealand and the HIT Lab US, and that actually is involved with a company that involves a number of old HIT Labbers that have gotten together. My dream was that we would have HIT Lab International, where we would have these centers of excellence, and we'd all play together and we'd swap students and opportunities and experiences and things like that. And indeed, we do have 3 HIT labs. There is a HIT Lab Australia at the University of Tasmania. It's not as active, and it largely because of the university just didn't come around to support like it has happened here, nor the government, for that matter. Tasmania is really small; they don't really have a lot of resources to draw from. But there was also going to be, as Mark mentioned earlier, a HIT Lab Mexico. And in Mexico City, and one of the early ones, and that I don't know if you mentioned that. It was last night. You probably mentioned that last night. Yeah. But and one of the students at the HIT Lab US was doing his PhD, and he took a professorship at UNAM, the University of Mexico, which has 440,000 students, and we set up a lab there. We were involved in the ceremony, starting it, but they just didn't have the resources to keep it going. HIT Lab Singapore, that was all set up, ready to go. There was a bunch of government money ready to happen, but we had a problem with the executive director that was going to be running the show there. He kept switching universities there in Singapore until finally we gave up. And there's HIT Lab UK. 7 million pounds in the bank to get it started. It would be a sister lab to all the rest of the labs. This was going to be starting in West Midlands and involving actually 4 universities: Birmingham, University of Birmingham, Warwick University, Coventry, and Aston. And these universities are putting in their money, matching money, 7 million pounds from the European Union, and everything was, and the company had already been established, the HIT Lab New Zealand Limited. And at that time, the UK had 9 regional economic development authorities, sort of like the Canterbury Development Corporation. And so it was all set to go, ready to launch, and then the Cameron government came in. The Labour government was running the show at the top of that time. The Cameron government came in, the Tories, and they did away with all the regional economic development authorities. So the money was in the bank, but no one signed the check. And let me tell you, it takes a lot of work to get to that point. And that's happened several times for me. And where it's ready to go, all the people, the university, everybody's ready to do it. And then something happens weird. That my dream is still that we would do it, that we would have a family, a larger family lab, certainly in Africa and in the economic, the European community. So we'll see. South America, maybe someday.
Yeah, I mean, I know that there's a research lab concept that that's the Australasian network. So that's right, Rob.
Well, I think the reason Phil, I mean, as you know, the reason that was attracted, what attracted the Canterbury Development Corporation to the HIT Lab US to begin with was that we were an economic engine. That was what we're supposed to be, this lab was intended to be an economic engine for New Zealand, and then the one in Australia, the same thing. So the idea that these labs can become economic engines for communities, same was going to be true in Singapore and the UK. So that was the key thing. That is the sort of the magic dust that we're talking about. It's not just a bunch of faculty members, getting funding to do research. It was about the whole process of how do you get from the laboratory to, basically a viable economic and industrial community.
Yeah, thanks for sharing.
I saw you nodding a lot. Would you like to add anything?
Yeah, just briefly. Sometimes I feel like I lack maybe I lack the vision to take this, or maybe it's just the will or the hours in the day to put into such huge efforts. Well, I think it's, so we don't have very much contact, for example, with the HIT Lab Australia at this time, and I know that there used to be. And I think that now that things are the way they are, I think that things are pretty, we have a good foundation now. I think these are some things we might explore. Growth is always a really interesting thing. When a restaurant does really well, the goal is to make another restaurant just like that restaurant, because, we did it once, we should be able to do it again. And almost to a letter, it never works out that way, because the passion and the person who's making it all work at the first restaurant can't be at both of them. And so I understand this, while I understand this urge to grow, by the same token, so the university, don't tell anybody, but the university would like us to become really large. And my mantra to them is always, I'm interested in bettering and not necessarily biggering the lab. So I really want to make the HIT Lab New Zealand the top place in the world to go and do what we do, and not be a cash cow with 50 students coming through every year and so on, which is really the pressures that are often pushed from above. But the administration here seems to get it. They really seem to see that if the HIT Lab focuses on becoming really, really great, there are other parts of the university that can focus on being big. And so I would leave it to Tom or the others to maybe, I fully support anything we can do, I think, to expand more broadly. But by the same time, I love the job at the level, I love my job at the level that it is right now. And I don't really have designs to get to move to something a little bit bigger, just because that's my own way. Is I think that I can make a big difference by focusing being the chef at this one restaurant, as opposed to trying to open a number of other restaurants in the chain, if that makes sense.
Thanks, Rob, and I hope that answered your question, Philip. There is a comment also in the chat from Mitchell, and maybe a question whether we would engage with the Children's University, and that's not to my knowledge at the moment. We do engage with a lot of schools, teachers, and students, and our colleagues in the School of Product Design. They have very close connections to some schools, so Adrian, Simon, and Sam, that many of you know, and that are also luckily still part of the HIT Lab. They have very good connections in, building these collaborations and relationships. Thank you so much for this conversation. It was extremely inspiring, really, really lovely, and so informative. My heart and head is still really full. And yes, sometimes I also wish they had more hours than it has. Mark seems to be really good in making the night, turning the night into day, and working more than is imaginable. So maybe you have some tips for us later on how to do that. As said, there's a lot of like social spaces also during the day where we can connect to each other and continue the conversation.
We'll hear from you as well, right?
Yes, after this session,
yes.
we'll hop right into the future of the HIT Lab. But I don't want to leave this session without giving you the opportunity, whether if you have like any last comment or idea that we couldn't touch upon, to have a moment for that. Now, there's a brief idea that you have, something that you want to share.
Well, I was thinking about this all during my flight, long flight to get here. And, but what really was the motivation behind coming here is to be here, to actually be able to feel it. And because my wife and I just love not only, Christchurch and New Zealand, but the energy and the excitement and the joy that I mentioned. So I'm thankful for Rob for putting this together. I had the opportunity to look through a lot of the photos. I had to go back into the archives and pull them out and look through all those photos, all those memories, all the students, and the fun. It was fun. In the end, it was fun. And what you just said, Rob, resonates with me that it's not about big. It's really about fun. I mean, it's about doing good and having fun at the same time, and getting a chance for everybody to find their bliss and to do what they can do, to be empowered. And so I'm really grateful for this opportunity. I don't know how many more of these anniversaries we'll have, or I'll even be attending, able to attend. But I'm thankful for the opportunity and for the feeling that I get being here. And we miss you, Rob. And you notice Rob is in this little square to the side here. Why isn't Rob here sitting at the table? Well, there are other there are COVID type reasons that he's in a little square. But thanks, Rob, for doing this. And Mark, my sort of my son, a surrogate son in a way, and for all that he's done to pick up from the very beginning and to help bring us to this point.
Thank you for being here and for having had all these ideas and visions that brought us all here, and that founded the funnel of the HIT Lab, and that's beautiful. Mark, do you have any? Oh,
just a couple of thoughts. One is that this is a great opportunity for everybody to reconnect now. So I'm looking forward to talking to you over the day, and for those of you who are in Christchurch, we'll see each other tonight. But to certainly encourage those of you who are not in the lab any longer to try and connect back again. It is a great opportunity to still be part of the HIT Lab story. And those of you who are our students now, certainly take advantage of the opportunities that the lab gives you. You've got a really amazing resource here with people and space and talent, and this is really your time to shine and to take advantage of that and to create your own future. And I'm really grateful for Tom for the opportunity that he gave me to build this, and I was happy to pass it opportunity on to Rob to be able to continue. And now, those of you in the lab today will have that same opportunity in the future as well. Take advantage of it as much as you can.
Thank you so much. And again, thank you for your willingness to share your knowledge and passion with us. And Rob, as the current director, it's up to you to have the last word in this conversation.
Well, before that one, then, if he's going to have the last word,
yeah.
let me just do something.
Yeah.
Before. I wanted to just explain this thing. I don't know if you can see that. Where did this come from?
Yeah.
The logo of the Hit Lab. The logo of the Hit Lab was actually designed by a graphics design student at the University of Washington. We sort of put out a call for students to come up with ideas. We told them about what we're trying to achieve and what kind of image would. This is the image that came up with. And of course, what you see is sort of the silhouette of a human emerging from whatever. It's a door that's opening and now going into the unknown with the universal gesture, reaching or saying hi, as the case may be. But also it's sort of an old computer there too, emerging. But that is now, of course, on all the logos. That's really what it represents what we're about. We're reaching and we're going into the unknown, and it's going to be fun. And hopefully we'll make a contribution of what's out there. Sorry, Rob, for
no, that's good.
For the stars.
That's right. That's right.
That's right.
These stars there. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what I was going to say is the nice addition for the New Zealand version is that now you can be reaching for the stars. So I think we've said a lot today, and again, I'm really both excited and humbled to be part of this group. One of the things I think that really best characterizes life at the lab right now is the fact that the staff have a literal open door policy with their offices. So we have these big sliding doors in the lab, and every staff member who has an office, just every morning they come in and they just open their doors wide open. And I find that as not only a symbolic, but also a physical manifestation of the way we look at things, which is just come talk to me. And so what I would say to all of the students who are just beginning or still a little bit timid about things is we're here for you. There is really no limit to what you can do. You just mainly have to ask, and we'll find a way to make it happen. Mike is a good example. So she's now doing a research stay in Germany. And Rory's done the same. He went and worked with Stefan and Heide in the Netherlands a number of years ago before they joined the lab. So these are things that are all possible. I know Mark has supported a number of students going to work at Google for internships and things like that. And so there's definitely great things ahead. I'll leave it at that. So, kia ora.
Thank you. Fantastic. Conclusion to our conversation. I say apologies, especially to Mel, for stretching the time a little bit, but I think this is really a unique opportunity to have the three of you at one table and talking to you. So I wanted to make room for this and have enough room. As we say, I would say we do have 5 minutes now to stretch our legs, get a cup of tea or coffee or whatever is needed, and then we'll meet again in ohyay to look into the future of the lab with Andy and me. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Heide. Thanks for leading, Heide.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Rob.
See you later.
See you.